Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. A story from New Orleans. As you know, New Orleans is celebrating its tricentennial this year, and it wouldn't be able to celebrate its history without celebrating its Catholic roots. They were on full display at this year's Rex Parade on Mardi Gras Day. Among the Catholic-themed floats, a replica of the original St. Louis Cathedral. This one is a shout-out to the Ursuline sisters who arrived in New Orleans in 1727. The devastating Good Friday fire of 1788 is remembered here. It destroyed 80% of the city, but due to the prayers of the Ursulines, was mitigated. This float honors Venerable Henriette de Lille. She was a free woman of color who founded the Sisters of the Holy Family in 1842. And New Orleans wouldn't be New Orleans without Our Lady of Prompt Succor. Hasten to help us. And prayers are certainly needed for all those affected by this next story. In Parkland, Florida, 17 people are dead and 14 more wounded after a 19-year-old man opened fire at Stoneman Douglas High School. The suspected shooter, Nicholas Cruz, is now in police custody and he's been charged. Cruz was a former student at the school who had been expelled for disciplinary reasons. It is the deadliest school shooting in the U.S. since 26 people were killed in Connecticut at Sandy Hook Elementary back in 2012. Here with analysis is Father Charles SIKORSKY, president of the Institute for the Psychological Sciences at Divine Mercy University in Arlington, Virginia, and he's joined by psychologist and dean, Dr. Suzanne Hollman. Thank you both for being here.
Welcome.
I want to start with some of the traits of these shooters that we've seen in these mass shootings. In your clinical work, Doctor, what are you seeing? What should people be on the lookout for? Obviously, in the case of Cruz, he was isolated, he was shunned by his peers, off to himself. What else should they be looking for? What else is common among these shooters?
I think those are very good starting points. The first thing we usually look for is any change in behavior. Is the person more withdrawn? Do they seem preoccupied with things that they may not have been as preoccupied with before? Is there a distinct change in mood? Are they spending more time alone, not coming out of their bedroom, for example, for hours at a time? So I think any significant change should immediately be flagged. And from that point on, what that change looks like becomes significant then.
Well, we hear people, we heard the sheriff the other day, and we heard it again today, the sheriff in Broward County saying, if you see something, say something. People don't know what to see. They don't know what to look for. What should they be looking for?
Well, I think in this case, if they know the person, we know that he lost his mother not too long ago, and then when you see these kinds of things, are they becoming? They look disturbed. Are they acting out on social media? That was one of the things that someone brought up.
That he wanted to be a professional school shooter.
Correct. Right. Things like that you would notice something that's just not normal. That they just seem more tense and stressed, and it's not easy. It's not easy, I don't think, for a person to recognize that. But
Dr. Hollman, are there often tells in their everyday behavior? Are they more prone to violent outbursts? I've read some things where they're abusive to animals. There's family violence in some cases that they've witnessed or been subjected to. Is that a common trait?
It's, the research right now is a little all over the place. But what we do know is that all of these things are risk factors. All of these things can predispose someone to end up making a decision or planning something that dramatic. And a lot of it stems from a sense of social isolation, not being seen in the world, and then trying to find these mechanisms to ensure that they are noticed.
Is a piece of it then narcissism? Is it people wanting to leave their mark, to be recognized, to be seen as somehow acknowledged, just acknowledged by everyone?
Well, it can be, especially people who've experienced some kind of trauma growing up, want to kind of prove themselves or show themselves valuable and worthwhile. I think as well, the whole social media thing tends to isolate. We kind of create this fantasy world around us.
Right.
And then real life isn't quite so nice sometimes, and we have things we struggle with. We have disappointments, we have grief and these things, and it can just exacerbate it. when there's really not a strong relational component with other people.
Right, they're not connected. They're not connected. The president talked about this today. He issued a statement, and well, here's what he had to say. And he was speaking directly to the kids who are dealing with this trauma. Watch.
I want to speak now directly to America's children, especially those who feel lost, alone, confused, or even scared. If you need help, turn to a teacher, a family member, a local police officer, or a faith leader. Answer hate with love, answer cruelty with kindness. We must also work together to create a culture in our country that embraces the dignity of life, that creates deep and meaningful human connections, and that turns classmates and colleagues into friends and neighbors.
You talked about isolation a moment ago, and clearly a number of these shooters are isolated individuals. I worry about the screen culture. Their entire life becomes on the smartphone or video games, and particularly for boys. Talk about how influential a daily regimen of these very violent video games can be. Is that an effect or an impactor here?
You know, again, from a purely research perspective, that's something that's being looked at, because we don't have that many longitudinal studies on that. But again, the mere act of someone isolating themselves in a dark room for days at a time, watching extremely violent content, I think that I don't even think you need to be a psychologist to look at that and think and say, that doesn't sound right somehow.
Yeah, no, it's vividly violent content. I mean, the detail of some of these games, heads being blown off, and I think when you put that on a widescreen TV, and you've got, some of them have the gun actually part of the game, you plug it into your console. Adam Lanza, I'm thinking about the Sandy Hook shooter, they found a cache of games. Left 4 Dead, School Shooter. These were the games he was playing and marinating in every day. Surely that has some impact.
I think so, especially in our culture today that's so dysfunctional in so many ways, right? The breakdown of the family, of marriage, of life, all these things that the church teaches and preaches about and sometimes takes a lot of heat for. There are consequences for ignoring that, and the church isn't out to just make rules. We do it because the church teaches what it teaches, because it supports the good of the human person.
Well, you know,
and that's what we really need to be focused on. What kind of culture are we creating?
Yeah, we're hearing a lot about gun control now, and people, inevitably, they have that conversation. And look, that's a worthy conversation. You know, you have access to these weapons, I get it. On the other hand, there's almost no attention to the human person involved with pulling the trigger. And it seems to me we have to focus on what is driving young people to go into these schools, some of them schools they knew or places they know, and enact this sort of murderous violence on people. Why do we see the increase? Is it, as Father was alluding to, familial breakdown? Is that part of what we're seeing here?
You know, I think that has a lot to do with it, because it encourages this sense of disconnect that so many people feel. And the attachment theorists have a term called relational trauma. And relational trauma really speaks to that sense of disconnection, that people have these traumatic relationships or absences of relationships, and there is no one there to repair those relationships. And in the absence of that repair, that is when people feel that literally there is no one there for them, and that they will then proactively go and try to connect through violence, essentially.
Father, what should we do as classmates, teachers, clergy, parents, members of a community? Is there something we can do or be on the lookout for to stop or intervene before another one of these senseless tragedies occurs?
Well, we can follow up on some of the things that Dr. Holman mentioned. But I think the bigger question, you know, John Paul II once was talking about this, the problem of evil in the midst of some crisis, and he mentioned that certainly as Christians, you know, we deplore evil actions. He said, but that's not enough. We're called to do a lot more. And he quoted St. Paul, we're called to conquer evil by doing good. And the ultimate answer is spreading the Christian faith. And it's working together to evangelize our culture, to create, to evangelize, but also to create respect for the family, and really draw attention to the fundamental values that build our culture up. Unfortunately, that's a long process, but you know, evangelization is a team sport, and we all have a role, not just clergy.
Well, and beyond evangelization, or perhaps the first movement of that evangelization, has to be love and human concern. And look, I've watched very closely interviews with these kids, some of them very articulate, the kids that went running out of that school in terror the other day as the gunfire broke out. But they also admitted they didn't know him. They had no interaction with him. They considered him kind of a freak and an outcast. He sat in a gazebo that they designated for kind of the freakish kids. There was a role that I think we all play in these things, known or unknown, seen or unseen, to coin a phrase. How do we arrest ourselves and sensitize ourselves to these people who are crying out, perhaps silently, in their isolation?
I think that the first step really is to look deep inside ourselves and ask ourselves, when we do notice something, what is it that's stopping us from reaching out? Is it because it feels too difficult, or we're not sure what to do? Is it too threatening? We really have to push ourselves to reach out to those people who are in that gazebo, as you say.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just a conversation. That's
right.
what they lack.
And another part of that, we talked before about the social media and the phones. You know, maybe parents can start controlling that a little bit more, so that when your kids are with their friends in school, they're not just checking their phone and so forth, but actually paying attention to the person next to them.
You know, I'm amazed in so many communities across America. Here, we lived in Virginia for many years, and we recently moved back to New Orleans. The difference in the way the children interact with one another is startling to me as a parent. When we were here, most kids dated, courted, had their relationships sitting across from each other, texting with a phone. You almost never see that in New Orleans. Now, that doesn't mean they don't text, but when they get together, they're really talking, they're interacting, sometimes they're fighting and arguing, but they're at least connecting as people. It seems to me we have to insist upon that for kids.
Yes.
And have we done enough as educators, as parents, in that area?
I don't think we have, and I am increasingly seeing cases where the parents and the children are texting one another to solve conflict.
Not talking, even though they're in the same house.
Even though they're in the same house, that you will have a teenager and a parent have an argument over text messaging. So I guess we need to start at home.
Yeah, it's an avoidance. It's an avoidance mechanism.
That family dinner every night, or as many nights as you can do it, to really foster good conversations and good relationships in the family. And then I think the more we do that, those closest to us, it carries over. It carries over.
Well, those bonds, when you're close to the people near you, if there's a problem in the family, you can work to solve it. But if you're utterly disconnected, everybody's in their own little satellite, you don't know what's going on. You're so detached, you don't know what that other person's doing, and now they're living in their own little private hell in some cases, and they're completely disconnected from their peers and family, and it's a terrible, you get a real hell from the artificially created one. And I do think it's up to all of us to step in and be that good Samaritan for those who need it in those dark moments.
Absolutely.
I thank you both for shining some light on this and for all you do.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you. Find out more about the Institute for the Psychological Sciences by visiting divinemercy.edu.